it's Nancy from Nancy Chu Homes at Keller Williams and J Metro Group. March 22nd, the Fed just, came out and announced another 25-point basis raise in the prime rate, which I have to tell you, 25 points sounds so much better than the 50 that they were kind of hinting around at so far all year. So that feels good, but it also feels kind of like a response from what's been happening over the last month. Let me go back. So I kind of wanted to respond to the actual press release that the Fed released. Okay. So on the 22nd, Jerome Powell came out, made a speech, and then they released this press release. And there's a couple of things on it that I thought were interesting and that I wanted to share. And I'm going to sort of, flash up the text for you as we go. Now, the first one was the phrase, recent indicators point to modest growth in spending and production. So I thought that was interesting because they used the word modest growth. That was nice. It didn't feel like rampant growth. It felt like they were acknowledging that CPI performed exactly the way it was predicted to perform. It didn't exceed it. It didn't it didn't do above, it didn't do below. It did exactly as predicted. So, when you have a prediction and the prediction is met, it's really frustrating when you've got a Federal Reserve that reacts as though, well, we've met that prediction. We must continue. I'm like, no. We met the prediction. That means that what you're doing is on track and potentially working. So let's not go crazy, shall we? Another thing that I thought was interesting is that here's the other phrase. Job gains have picked up in recent months and are running at a robust pace. The unemployment rate remains low. Inflation remains elevated. That, for me, is a statement of fact. The fact that the Fed has been basically playing, one of their dual mandates against each other, right? So don't forget, we're going to rewind. The Fed has a dual mandate. Mandate number one, inflation down. Mandate number two, employment high. They want to keep people in jobs, but they want to keep inflation down at the same time. And those two things, unfortunately, are kind of part of what's at play here. In order for the Fed, or at least the way they believe it has to be done, in order for them to reduce inflation, what they want to do is they want to stop wage growth. They want to stop jobs. They want people to sort of stop buying and stop spending. That's how you get inflation to slow down. So, it's been kind of hard to watch the Fed actively try to destroy the job market or slow the job market. I shouldn't say destroy, slow the job market, in order to try to reduce inflation, especially since it goes against, their other solid pillar of what they're supposed to be doing. But it's a statement of fact, and they made it. And I thought that was fine. Now, the next line of this press release is, the U.S. banking system is sound and resilient. That, to me, was the Fed so much and clearly coming out and saying, do not hit a run on the banks, right? We all know what happened with SVB, this mid-sized regional bank. I don't know if you guys know about this. It's a mid-sized regional bank. It did fail recently. It was the second largest bank failure we've had since Washington Mutual. And what was interesting about it was, for me, this is like a manufactured, there were lots of things that could have been done to keep this bank from failing. And everybody along the way just kind of kept making like the wrong decision. The CEO didn't have to come out and be like, well, we're in a little bit of a bind here. They could have gone out and got VC capital. Like, I really don't, they could have gone out and gotten deposits. Like, I don't really know why this had to turn into a run on a bank. It really didn't have to go that far. So it was really interesting because it felt like the bond market kind of stopped and said, you know what, the Fed's going to be dealing with, banking system for a little bit. We're going to do our thing. And it turned out that the Fed came out and said, no. We're going to handle this bank failure thing, and we're going to keep our foot on inflation. It was interesting. It was like they came out and said, we are excellent at multitasking. We can do both. Everybody was a little bit surprised. So the bond market had 3 days of like woohoo party time. And then they came back and said, all right, looks like we're still on the same path. So I thought that was very interesting. Now, they did indicate that they were going to possibly tighten up credit conditions, which for me is interesting because we were just talking about loosening like FHA credit conditions, for instance. And they also said that they're going to continue to work on the committee remains highly attentive to inflation risks. And at the same time, they also say the extent of all these effects is uncertain. So I thought it was interesting that in one paragraph, they literally said, we're going to handle the banking issues, and then, oh, we're going to handle inflation, and we have no idea how this is all going to shake out. They just like to leave the door open every single time, right? And they do a pretty good job doing that. Okay, so by paragraph 3, they, of course, indicate that they reiterate their mandate. We seek to achieve maximum employment and the inflation rate of 2%, okay, which is their long-term goal. And they tell us that they've decided to raise the target rate for the federal funds rate from 4.75% to 5%, that dreaded 5%. That number is that number that we've all been like, are we getting to 5? Are we getting to 5? Oh my gosh, are we really getting to 5? Well, yes, we are gotten to 5. All right. So they also indicate that additional policy firming may be appropriate, which is them keeping the door open for further increases if they feel like they need to. But at the same time, I had like a tiny little bubble of hope that they were going to slow their roll a little bit on their inflationary measures, because they do say one thing, and I thought this was important, okay? The committee will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy and the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation and economic and financial developments. That's been a huge concern in the sense that, the housing portion of the CPI data being the inflation data, right? The housing portion of the CPI data has always been a bit of a lag, right? Housing data, as a general rule, has always been very frustrating because it's a lagging indicator. I talk about this all the time. If I, close on a house today, if I'm making an offer on a house today, right? I use comps that go back potentially 6 months. And then when that house was initially listed, that house could have been listed with comps that potentially go back 6 months. So in other words, it's really a lagging indicator. You're closing on a property, but really you're talking about data that happened upwards of 2 to 3, 4, 5, even 6 months prior. Okay, so it's a lagging indicator. The housing number continues to be a significant portion of the increase of CPI, which is why I think it's important at this point to put the brakes on any more necessarily any more, shall we say, monetary firming. In other words, please stop raising the interest rate, and let's let it sit for a month or two and see if the housing lag picks up and brings those numbers down. Because listen, there's a lot of market areas across the country where the market has pretty much dead stopped because of the inventory challenges. You couple that with the high interest rates, and there's entire states doing very little real estate. So how about before we send ourselves off a cliff and into a potential actual recession, why don't we just slow our roll and let the lag catch up and see what happens? And I thought that was interesting that the Fed indicated that they understood that there was a lag. Voices who are screaming that, we're talking about it. We're thinking about it. We understand maybe we should slow our roll just a little bit. So I love how in this one particular press release, they've basically, said, we'll do everything, banking failures, we'll handle inflation. Oh, and by the way, we understand that if we have to, we'll keep raising, but we also understand that there's a lag time and maybe we should slow our roll. I mean, we just don't know. It's all so uncertain. Very well written press release. It kind of sort of answers all the questions and none of the questions all at once. I just thought I'd share that with you because it made me giggle. All right, guys. The market continues to be a little thin of inventory, but the truth is there are still houses out here if you want them, and a lot of them are fabulous. And if you are looking to take advantage of this market and want to have a conversation about how you would sell your home, and then where you would go, I am happy to do so. 917-992-3098. If you watch on YouTube, please like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys next week.